This is supposed to be a workshop, but in order to, I'm not sure we're going to have enough time to do a full workshop. So I think what we'll do is run through a few things, around systems thinking and the approach that we've talked about today. Systems thinking has come up in a lot of the talks, certainly the ones that we heard in the opening session this morning, Giovanni's talk, my own, and others. So I thought I'd just talk a little bit about that because it's the approach that's behind all of the things that we're doing at Acres, and then we'll see how it goes. If we have time, we'll see what we can do with an actual workshop. I will tell you that we're actually doing a special event. It's not a meeting. It's called Synergy. In Boston in October 1st and 2nd, which is going to be a really unique event. It's going to be a group of global thought leaders coming together. Some of these people, they're going to share their failure stories about things that they tried to do without thinking about the full system's consequences and screwed up. And then they're going to rework them after some systems engineers from the MITRE Corporation and all analyze it. And then we're going to take 3 areas of clinical research: patient engagement, protocol design, and information technology. And we've got panels that are coming together. We're going to look at it from all different sides of the elephant and put it back together and come up with system solutions. It'll be all spontaneous, no rehearsals or anything like that. So it should be an interesting thing. They're going to be in Boston around the 1st, 2nd of October. Please come. I think it would be fun. So thought I'd just run through a few things. Have any of you ever had training or anything in systems thinking? There are a lot of different approaches to systems thinking. Obviously, for a long, long time, everybody believed that you could understand the way complex things work by taking them all apart and looking at the components. And if you understood how all of the components worked, then you would basically know how the thing works. That's not true, because a big thing, a real system, only does what it can do if all those pieces go back together in a way that they actually can accomplish something. And so that's one of the remarkable things about systems thinking, that realization that it's the synergy of the whole that you get when you put all the pieces together that result in the unique outcomes, capabilities. That really gives you a different perception. One of the leaders in this area, particularly in what's called SSM, that is not stunning sadomasochism or anything like that. This is soft systems methodology. Peter Checklin was the person who developed all of this in response to that recognition of the fact that systems are not always hardwired systems. You don't have one unique outcome. If you're building a computer system, that may be true, and so on, because they're all, go to certain specifications. But if you want to apply systems thinking to complex organizational processes and all, then you need to recognize the variability that's going to occur and the fact that they go together in different ways. Not me, I didn't do it. With that as a background, this soft systems thinking is really, it's a process for managing. It's for really achieving an organized action out of the chaos that can sometimes exist when you're, dealing with a very complex environment, like the airlines that we talked about today, a highly competitive business, multiple pieces and all, but it applies equally to the pharmaceutical drug development enterprise. And indeed, I think many of us would argue that had the industry applied some, simple systems thinking, many years ago, about the time the airlines did, we'd be in a better place today. But the process is one of actually coming together, experts from different areas within the enterprise, and looking at the overall process and deciding what sort of outcomes would be desirable and how we might be able to achieve those goals, particularly reacting to the current changes that are going on in the environment. So you can see how all of this is relevant to some of the discussions that we've been having here today. This kind of thinking has to recognize, of course, that there are multiple players, multiple viewpoints. Everyone will feel the elephant or see the elephant from a different location, and their perception there's no right or wrong, the perceptions are there, and so the real key thing is how do certain parts of it get validated and so on. Recognizing that all of these different players will see things differently and beginning to take that into consideration, you can actually apply almost the same kind of rigor to this analysis that you really would for one of the hardwired systems. And the goal in the end, of course, is to come up with a rational action plan for moving forward that will be implementable and obviously achievable and so on. So when you look at, just to talk generally about systems engineering for a minute, in traditional systems engineering, you generally start with the specific purpose or objective and then work backwards from that to see how you were going to get there. You would identify multiple possibilities, approaches, then decide which of those approaches were likely to be most effective, would be most appropriate to purpose, and then would be economically viable. As I said, that approach hasn't always worked when you get to a complex system that has multiple personalities and other things involved. And so there has to be a way of working toward some consensus that can resolve the confusion and so on. So this is really the soft systems methodology, which is again a variation from the original approach to systems thinking, is really a modification that allows the incorporation of the diversity of views and interests of the stakeholders. But it really is all about the stakeholders. I don't want to repeat this too much, so that what the desired outcome is really it's an intervention, something that will make a difference. Because if we just analyzed everything, put it back together in the same way, so we didn't do anything different, it wouldn't accomplish very much. And so the approach that we have to take is one of becoming informed about the situation, and to think about, as I said, the various approaches to it in terms of the pieces that would go together. Again, there's no right answer. It's really in terms of identifying what would work best in the current environment. So if you were to, when we do this in workshops, as we'll do at the Synergy event in Boston, the approach is one of truly looking at what the real world concern is, and as I said, then looking at the relevant systems for achieving the activities or addressing the activities in a very purposeful way, and this is the way you actually get to an ultimate solution. So the first step in the process is to again look at what is the real world concern, be expressed from other peoples, and from that you distill where's the common ground. Okay, and then to begin to delve into it to identify the complexities, so that you really know what the problems are that are behind the concern. If you can express that problem situation in a meaningful way, then you're ready to move on to the next step, which is to you first have to come up with a set of criteria, language, root definitions of the particular pieces of the system, and then build these conceptual models that can be considered in order to come up with a solution. The actual methodology that is employed in most soft systems thinking is what they call the CATWO analysis. We've all heard of SWOT analysis, and there's SPECT analysis. There's different kinds of things. The CATWO analysis is one that has been useful for this kind of thinking, and that is the CATWO is obviously an acronym that covers the steps. So the first one is to identify, and the words here, of course, depending upon the enterprise, may be different. But basically, the C for customers. Who is this actually going to be needed by, and of course, what's their current situation, and how will this change it? Indeed, how will they react? Sometimes the reactions to what's being proposed are very different than what's expected. A good example is, I talked this morning about site accreditation. Well, it's very interesting. It sounds like, site accreditation for clinical research sites would be a perfectly reasonable, wonderful thing to do. Sites that get a gold seal of approval will actually be valued by the sponsors. They'll be preferred. That's where everybody will want to put their trials and so on. Well, that's not the way all the sites see it. Okay? The sites are actually afraid that if the standards are higher than where they're at now, it will be a barrier to entry into the overall process. And when you've got a set of sites out there where 70% of them are going to fold after one clinical trial, you can understand why there are a lot of people who would say, I don't know if I want to have to meet standards. And what about the extra work that we'll have to do to meet standards? You mean people are actually going to have to be trained? Ugh, the thought of having to be trained to actually do clinical research before you're allowed to do it is a pretty frightening possibility. Somebody's been doing clinical research for 30 years and has never had any formal training. Because in fact, PI doesn't really stand for principal investigator. It stands for practically invisible, because they're usually not there while the trial is actually going on. So this is the kind of concern that enters into the analysis as you actually do it. Because there will be winners and losers. If you look at all the research sites, the ones that say, I got it, we're a good site, we're going to be better, we'll be rewarded, let's do this, that's one approach. The ones that can't get there will go away. So there will be winners and losers, and you need to appreciate that, because if there are more losers than winners, then probably there's not going to be a very warm reception for what you're going to try. So, CATWO, who are the actors? Okay, who's going to be doing what in order to achieve the solution? What will be the impact of that? In this instance, if we're thinking about pharmacovigilance, who's going to be involved in this? The regulatory agencies, sponsors, CROs, sites. You have to think of all. What about patients? I think patients and both those of us who actually take drugs might have some interest in whether or not they know that drugs are safe. I'd be more inclined to take a drug if I knew it were safe than if I didn't know. If I was, every time, I served on an ethics committee for a number of years, and they remember the study that came up with lamotrigine. It's going to be applied for a new indication, and somebody described Stevens-Johnson syndrome to me the first time, where you take the drug, you have an odd idiosyncratic reaction, and it's like you get a total body burn and all of your skin falls off. That's a pretty scary kind of thing. He said, well, I'm feeling a little depressed. Do I really want to take this drug where all my skin might fall off? I don't know. But again, it's just you need to understand how people are going to react. And some reactions are not logical. Some reactions are purely emotional, political, financial. They come from all different aspects, so you need to think about that. T, transformation. Okay? What's the process for getting from where we are today to where we have to be tomorrow? What's the process for taking the inputs that we have available today and translating those into what the desired outputs are? And you'll remember from my talk this morning, put up that complex diagram with all the different stakeholders, all the inputs, all the outputs, all the people, all the processes. a systems analysis has to include that. And of course, this is an exercise that we've gone through for the whole enterprise, but there are different parts of it now that need to be developed in further detail. So that's part of what I thought we could try to do today, although again, we're not going to have a whole lot of time, so I'm just going to get through this description. But at least when we do get to the point, and I'm sure it's going to happen soon, when we start talking about how we move to a new model, you all will be the best prepared people in the whole world to take part in it. We'll look for that. So the world view, okay? We talked about a real life view, but it's what is the environment that this solution is going to have to fit into, okay? And for instance, what would the impact of a more effective pharmacovigilance process be on the overall drug development process? And beyond that, how would a more effective drug development process affect economic development, social development, health? In the long run, these are all very legitimate questions that there's a worldview that has to be taken into consideration because of the extent, even though you're working in one system, that is pharmacovigilance system, that's part of the drug development system, which is part of all these other things in the world. So you can keep scaling up. Eventually you get to the thing like the Gaia theory, that we're just one big organism, and like I'm a mitochondrion and so on. But the it's you have to put it in the bigger picture. This is always one of the really important questions. Who's going to own this? And there are different meanings to the word ownership. In business, immediately it's sort of like, who's going to pay for it, who's going to make the money from it, and all of that. But it's not as simple as that. Ownership, falls to the people who are going to be willing to step up and take the risks in order to identify the stakeholders and begin to work with them to bring about change. And of course, those people who already think they own it are going to be unhappy when someone else begins to take ownership. This is like the problem we talked about with the regulatory agencies. The FDA really believes that it is the 800-pound gorilla of regulatory agencies, and that the rest of the world should do everything the way the FDA does that. Well, the rest of the world doesn't feel the same way, which is, of course, why ICH has been, only a partial success. I wouldn't go so far as to say it's been a, complete abject failure, but I always point out that harmonization is just a euphemism for failure to standardize. Because that's what we really need, is standardization. But we couldn't get there, and we'll never get there with ICH because it's put together wrong. You can't have three parties sitting around the main table and everybody else is an observer and expect to really get to the point that you're going to have true standardization or even harmonization. So you can't get there. But if you're going to be approaching pharmacovigilance, and you have the UDRA dictionary, and you have the MEDRA dictionary, and you have all these other things. You have HUART, the WHO's dictionary. Well, somewhere along the line, the people who own those things are going to want to have a voice in the process. And understanding who those players are, what their stake is in the whole thing, who's going to be able to help, who's going to stand in the way. If somebody's going to stand in the way, how do you either get around them, over them, through them, or get them to join you? You have to really think about those things as you go forward. So ownership becomes very, very critical. And the financial aspects of it are non-trivial. One of the biggest concerns around everything that Acres has done is a fear that somehow Acres wants to take over everything. Okay, that they want to have one big monolithic thing that everybody else has to use. Well, that couldn't be farther from the truth, because as I said earlier, Acres is really it's an open, nonprofit, multi-stakeholder, public interest organization that's really building something to help everybody. But that's not an easy message to get across very often. So, the final point in the CATWA analysis is the issue of environmental constraints. We have the place that we are in the current situation. we're going to have to move from that. And so there are going to be, obviously, existing. When I made the comment earlier today that the fact that we don't have, what's the word, reciprocity, so that we could have, EMA approve a drug and the other agencies can just look at their stuff and approve it, or we can have actually an audit and all of them could use that single audit. It's ironic that 80%, a lot of redundant audits that are done, and 80% of the redundant audits between the EMA and the FDA are all in the United States and the UK. The two of the countries that probably have among the better developed systems. That's the last place that you would think to have redundant audits. But because the auditors are trained differently, they're not certified, by the way. If you had auditors trained according to specific standards and there was a standard operating procedure for doing the audits that was consistent across the agencies, well, they could just share the audits. And that would reduce the burden for everybody. It would provide for greater consistency, greater quality, less expense. Everybody wins. One would think they would have done that a long time ago, but it turns out if you look in the details of the FDA regulations and the EMA, I don't know if they call them regulations over here or what, there are little things, there are little hooks and barbs that are in there that prevent them from doing that. They simply can't do it because of the actual legislation, empowering legislation that places certain restrictions there. And those restrictions got placed there by people who are interested in preserving the status quo. Okay, if the U.S. wants to make sure that foreign drugs can't come into their high-priced market and undercut them, well, you make sure that there's something in the regulations that prevent that from happening. There's a reason why the United States, spends more on drugs than any country in the world by far, has the highest drug prices, doesn't have any kind of universal health care to speak of until recently. But that was all done in order to basically protect the pharmaceutical industry's financial situation in the United States. So those are things that are kind of in the court, but that's part of the environmental constraints that we have to deal with. So until you can understand those, you don't get there. So that's what the sort of soft systems methodology and approach is all about. And I don't know that we're going to really have time to do this. If we had a little more time, we could actually go through some of this. But I think we've seen some of the thinking expressed today. I think in particular, some of the talks that we heard from Karen this morning and others have really sort of set the stage for the kinds of things that we need to do and think about. But why don't I just leave these with you as thought questions, and perhaps we'll get together in the future. We can give you a PDF of this because I have complete confidence that within the next 3 years, there's going to be a major effort to begin to solve the very problems that we were talking about today. But if we begin to apply the questions from today, reply to the questions from today, the kind of soft system methodology that we're talking about, the kinds of questions we would ask would be, what is the ultimate goal for an ideal pharmacovigilance system? Okay? What would we want to accomplish? And basically, what would we want to accomplish? I mean, safety. Safety. For whom? For patients, okay? So it goes back to what I said, patient safety, job one. And what does safety mean? What do you think?
Benefit, reduced risk.
Huh?
Optimal benefit, reduced risk.
Okay, so that, we recognize drugs have benefits, so that's achieving the optimal balance between the benefits and the risks for a particular drug. Okay, so beyond that, okay, those might be the highest goal. What kinds of things, in terms operationally, what might, the pharmacovigilance system look like?
Cost effective. Cost effective.
Cost effective. Okay.
Big importance for pharma.
Okay.
It's a big expense.
That would be very important. Yeah. Probably. Yeah. Go ahead. Simple. Okay. Simple, easy to use. Because the system we have today is so complex, nobody uses it. Okay, we can't get a doctor to file, an adverse drug reaction. So we have no information that we would need in order to achieve either the cost effectiveness or the ultimate goal. Okay, so what are the things, what other components of this? It's going to be simple, cost-effective, okay? Should be, what, time-wise, temporally. Real time, right? Doesn't do any good to find out that the plane has crashed and go and look and see, oh, look, plane crashed, too bad. You need to know before the plane crashes, okay, whether or not, if you can pick up signals ahead of time, that's what's really important. So timely, you want to do that? Real time would be, valuable. What do we do about the complexity issue if we want to achieve simplicity? We've heard about all the different, dictionaries for, drugs and events and so on.
Standardized.
So we need to standardize, okay? In terms of data access. If you've got stuff in, as I said, the freestanding platforms everywhere where you can't use it, it makes it really hard to achieve the goal of being able to detect signals. The FDA right now, I talk about the FDA a lot because I know most about them, although actually I'm meeting with Fergus and the crew over at the EMA tomorrow who are working with us on the things that Acres is doing. The FDA they may have, there's no such thing as a new drug. Okay? Anytime there's a new class of drugs that's coming out, there are at least 10 companies working on, some variation of the same drug. Okay, so that, and they all know basically what is the likelihood of having renal toxicity, hair toxicity, whatever. They know those things, but the FDA is really not allowed to take the results from one company and go in and say, we are finding from Bayer, okay, that this drug in fact causes people to go blind. Okay, they can't do. How is it possible that we could have a system that would allow that information not to be shared, in fact, not require that it's shared? And then across not only the regulatory areas, but you could look at classes of drugs, whole sorts of things. But the only way that you can do that is if, in fact, you have information in a standardized form, data in a standardized form that can be appropriately aggregated and analyzed in order to improve the signal detection, in order to actually get to safety, okay, in a simple, cost-effective way. All right, so you begin to see how you get there. But so we think about that, and so what are the real-world factors in the way? I've already talked about some of those. If we were going through this whole exercise, it would be, a multiple-day sort of retreat. You get yourself on a little island, off the coast here someplace, and got nice rolling fields and things around. You sit and you have a pint now and then and talk about it. That's what you really, this needs to be something that has some thought behind it. But you have to identify those real-world factors, and then you say, okay, what do we have today that we can work? What works? Because if you have some things that work, why reinvent the wheel? That's not cost-effective. That's not simple. Let's just do it, start out with what we have if it comes close. And this is where the scene, I think, from Apollo 13, if any of you remember that movie Apollo 13, where they have to make, the CO2 absorption canister, out of, because otherwise the guys are going to be asphyxiated with their own breath. And they come in, dump it on the table and say, okay, we need to make one of these out of this. And you got 30 minutes. That's not this drastic situation that we're in now, but at least that's what we need to do. What do we have to work with to build what we think we need? And what don't we have? Okay? We don't have a unified safety and clinical database. We don't have the ability for electronic medical records, EHR systems, to seamlessly interact with the other systems that we have for clinical research. In fact, there are like 34 electronic health record systems in the United States, and none of them can talk to each other. So you can't even do good public health with them. How did that happen? Because somebody wasn't thinking about it as a system. And the father of the EHR in the US just wrote an article about 6 months ago saying, what happened to the interoperability? Because it should have been their design principle, number one, interoperability, absent. Okay? And even though they've tried to create standards like HL7 to drive this, It hasn't happened. So what we're going to see instead is a couple of large companies like Epic and Cerner and so on will begin to develop systems, integrate those. By having some systems that can integrate, they will become market leaders. The others will go out of business. It's the sort of the nature of things. But so developing the new tools that we have, and then say, all right, we have the old tools, we're going to build the new tools. How can we put them together in order to achieve our ultimate goals? And then how do we migrate? Okay? We just don't have the time. It would be a lot of fun probably to do this, but we just don't have the time right now. But I think it sort of stands for itself in terms of thinking about it. But there needs to be that evolution, the process for beginning the transformation, which is why I put this diagram up this morning. It's when you think about the complexity of the overall drug development process, all the stakeholders, all the this is about as simple as you can boil it down to. But the version of this that you'll get to see the next time will actually be a Prezi. Any of you use Prezi for presentations? It's really kind of cool because what you do is you kind of go right here and you tap the screen and whoa, up comes the EHR systems and how they all work together. You can close that one down and come over here and boom, up comes the pharmacovigilance system so that you can use it as a way to guide the discussions. But at least this picture gives a conceptual model and that's I forget now what they call the diagram, but the immediate outcome of the immediate outcome of every one of these systems thinking exercises is what they call the rich model diagram. In other words, it's a picture, okay, that's truly worth more than 1,000 words because it captures the essence of what needs to be done. And once you can do that, then you can begin to say, all right, this is something we need and we don't need. So it's a way to make it all happen. We've put a whole lot of work in here, which is why there's all of this detail. Okay? But these other areas, we know the need to have a collaborative universal interface that exists within this federated trust framework and so on. We've heard that from talking to the stakeholders. So we know that's what you have to do. We've heard about these data vaults. We don't talk about data warehouses. Would you want to put your most precious belongings in a warehouse? No, you put it in a vault someplace. The difference, the warehouse has broken windows, the doors are all smashed and people go in and out. You need to have that precious stuff in vaults. Are these going to be a little vault sitting in Washington, D.C. or London? No, they're going to be cloud-based. All over, virtual vaults. But in order to take all these cloud-based databases so that people can keep their own information on their own platform, you need to have security for every piece of information that's moved from one place to another is within an appropriately encrypted packet with high levels of security. You need to know who's going to go into the vault, keep track of all that. And it's amazing what happens if people know they're being watched. They don't do things that they would want people watching them do if it was not a good thing. And so knowing that you're going to be leaving personal footprints everywhere you go is one of the most effective ways to avoid people going places that they're not supposed to go. So probably time to wrap up, but I again, there'll be a lot more stuff coming out on this. All of our stuff is open and collaborative and everything. And if any of you want to get more information or want to get involved, your organizations, we now have over 80 strategic allies and a number of big organizations like Pfizer and AstraZeneca and Takeda and Fujitsu and a bunch who are all part of what we're doing. And we'd be delighted to have other organizations, big and small, who see the needs, see a new future, something that will help out. So why don't we stop there? I'll just say thank you. If you have any questions, be happy to answer them. But hopefully this has been enough of a demonstration to be meaningful. So, okay. Thank you all very much. And I think that rounds up today. Okay. Yep. I'll answer any questions if anybody have any. If not, yes.
Do you have any idea how far this kind of thinking is already happening in real life?
Oh, well, it's quite down the road because this is where we expect to be in 3 years. Okay, so yeah, there's a lot of thinking that's gone behind it. But if you look at the real-time pharmacovigilance, which is an appropriate thing for this group to talk about, you're the world's experts in pharmacovigilance. Okay, so we need to tap in. One of our we call foundation initiatives is called the Product Safety Culture Initiative. It's headed up by Brian Edwards. Some of you know Brian. He's at NDA Regulatory, former president of the International Society of Pharmacovigilance, which is one of our strategic allies. We need to take that group and convene the people who really know about, you know, ADRs and SUSARs and, you know, all those other things to say, okay, just to map out this in sufficient detail that the operational system behind it can be developed. My expectation is that there may well be a need for a sort of nonprofit public benefit corporation that could be the coordination center for all of these various things coming and going, with an oversight committee that would be the group that decides, okay, what is the global standard going to be? We have to go. One of the really cool things about systems is that they drive standardization. You know, if you get a whole bunch of people coming saying this is going to be the global standard, and somebody says, well, I don't like that, I'm going to do it my own way. You know what? 3 weeks they'll be out of business because the rest of the world's going to leave them behind. And so that's the reason the pharmaceutical industry has been unable to move beyond its present state, is because they're standing there saying, well, you know, where are we going to go? I can't see any way out. Give them a way out that involves the system, they'll use it. And that's where we're going. So thinking needs to go beyond these. You know, smart monitoring, all of that risk-based management stuff. If you take, you know, the 47 different varieties of risk-based monitoring that have been promoted and all, and you begin to put them together, you know, you can apply the statistical tools from groups like, you know, Clue Points and Clinaria and that sort of thing that use these statistical algorithms to identify, you know, you can actually take a program that Clue Points has put together, look at a massive data set for a new drug application, and know basically immediately whether or not there's fraud in that database. By, again, using multivariate techniques. We know, for instance, what the normal biologic variation of creatinine is. So if you have a drug that may have renal toxicity, it's one of the outcomes, or one of the lab values, how you can do it. If you look at those data and you find out that the creatinine variability, okay, is only, you know, a fraction of what it should be, it's absolutely certain that with, you know, probably a huge probability that somebody's making up, everybody's just putting in 1.0, 1.0, 1.0, okay, because that's not the way it happens. So using these kind of algorithms, you can do that. Wouldn't it be great if, on an ongoing basis, you didn't have to be sending monitors to a site halfway around the world, have them sit there to see whether or not people had transcribed from the paper medical record to the Excel spreadsheet, the number? You know, that's the single greatest source of human error in clinical trials. What's the solution for that? You have 2 people do it. Okay? So that, I mean, my God, that's crazy. If you were able to have electronic data capture from a medical record into an EDC system, okay, so that it's automated and it's continuously being monitored. Just like, you know, my BMW is smarter than the system, or my wife's BMW. I don't have one. I have a Jeep. But, you know, a BMW it's a system. You put a driver in a BMW and you've got a true system. And the car is smart enough. It knows everything that's working, everything that's not working. It knows where you've been, where you're going. It can answer questions for you. So it's that's the kind of stuff we need to do over here and in these other pieces. Each of the stakeholder groups are now working to identify what their needs are. We're collaborating with the FDA, the EMA, you know, the ethics review boards. They're telling what their needs are, building it all in. So it's a fun time. It's exciting. And hope you get involved. Let's go have a beer or something. What do you say? Okay? All right. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.